this time. There we go.
I think it'll work this time too. Sorry, we had some technical difficulties the first time we tried to get the video going. So I'm going to start again from the beginning. So you may have seen some of the posts on my page. I recently started a new project where I am teaching a different health philosophy. It's a completely different health paradigm than the paradigm that I previously was teaching for, 5-6 years. I've been teaching people about lifestyle and changing your food and how, healthy foods help prevent cancer and how unhealthy foods cause cancer, can cause genetic changes, can cause changes in your DNA, can damage your DNA, and that causes cancer cells. And so that's what I believe, that's what information I had been taught and exposed to, that by cleaning up your diet and changing your nutrition, that you could change your likelihood of developing cancer. And I saw cancer as a dysfunction, as something in the body that we don't really know why it happens. I thought it was in response to certain toxins, in response to certain foods, that the body will cause, extra cell growth, and that by cleaning up the toxins, cleaning up the diet, reducing your stress, kind of doing all the lifestyle stuff, chiropractic care, exercise, that you could decrease your likelihood of developing any disease, especially and including cancer. But then I learned this new philosophy, this new paradigm. It's really a new natural science because it is in line with embryology, so the way our body developed. It's in line with evolution, so the way our bodies have developed over a very long period of time. And to me, it's just it just makes the most sense to me out of anything that I've researched, out of anything that I've studied. It just makes sense to me. And the philosophy, kind of the whole premise, is that cancer and other diseases, they are not dysfunctions of the body. They're not errors. It's not the body got exposed to these toxins and now there are these cells out of control, and that's wrong, and now we need to do something to decrease that cell growth, whether through nutrition, whether through some type of medical intervention. We want to slow down, stop these cells from forming. That's kind of the typical paradigm. But what Dr. Hamer discovered is that cancer is a programmed biological special program that is designed for survival. And it's in response to a conflict, some type of trauma, something that catches you off guard in your environment. And as these beings that we are programmed for survival at all costs, we want to survive, we want to survive, we want to survive no matter what. We want our offspring to survive, and that's what we're programmed for. And so what we see as disease, what we see as dysfunction, what we see as a clump of cells that's just reproducing and multiplying, and we've got this lump, we've got this cancer in a lung, in a breast, in a colon, and we say, oh my goodness, this is an error, this is messed up, the body's done something wrong, we've got to stop it, we've got to kill these cells, we've got to get them out of the body before they can spread and go other places. So it's kind of like huge fear, huge panic, huge scare. I need to change my diet. I need to, stop eating all sugar. I need to, make all of these super drastic changes because I'm basically being punished for the sins of my past, of like these things I didn't know about. So a lot of things, people are eating for years and then, we find out, this causes cancer, that causes cancer. But in this new paradigm, that completely shifts, and it's like we see the body and what it's doing in a completely different way. And instead of seeing cancer as an error, we see it as normal cell, normal body function, normal response to a death fright. If you are in a death fright situation, if you are, locked in a small closet or a trunk or something, and you're worried, you're scared that you're going to die, that you're going to suffocate. Your body instinctively, as soon as it perceives that you have this conflict, as soon as there's something that might kill you, your body gets to work right away in whatever way it can to facilitate your survival. And in the case of a death fright, the body will proliferate additional lung cells, additional alveoli cells, so that you can absorb more oxygen and have a greater chance of surviving this conflict situation. However, we don't typically experience a lot of actual life and death situations in our day-to-day life. But because of these really advanced, amazing minds that we have, we can experience death fright conflicts, separation conflicts, anger conflicts, nest worry conflicts. We can experience so many different types of conflicts and have these conflicts go on for years. because we are emotionally preoccupied with it, but they're not actual, like, in the room, like, things that are going to kill you, but because we tend to perseverate on things, and we worry about things, and we watch the news, and we, get fired up, and we get worried about things, and we're constantly kind of in a state of turmoil. A lot of people are anyways. The body is constantly doing things to help you through that situation. Whether it's, in the case of a nest worry conflict, it's creating additional breast gland cells. In the case of a territorial conflict, it actually will erode the lining of your coronary arteries and make it wider, so there's more blood available to go to your heart so that you can fight your way out of this territory conflict. So, all of that preamble to get to the topic today is, does bad food, does unhealthy food, do toxins cause cancer?
Yeah. Well, one thing, just to kind of like take on what you, because there's a lot, that's a lot, right? It's
a lot, I know.
And I think that one of the things about this, the GNM perspective and the 5 biological laws and all this different stuff is the recognition of the fact that, okay, so like you've got the traditional paradigm, or you've got like the standard medical paradigm, which is to say that essentially it is genetics that are responsible for this cancer, right? It's the genes that are causing this bad and undesirable and scary and awful thing, and that's why it's happening. And then you have sort of like the holistic perspective, which is this big umbrella, which is pretty much saying, well, it's not actually the genes, it's the things the genes are being exposed to, it is the things that you're eating, it's the this, it's that, it's the other thing. But the interesting thing about those two paradigms that kind of share, and they maybe in a sense could even be kind of like one subsets of one paradigm, is the assumption that the kind of like the buck stops at the physiological expression of cancer itself, which is to say, regardless of what you say causes it, or regardless of what you think is the appropriate way to respond to it, the thing that we call cancer is a problem, it's a mistake, it's either the outgrowth of just genes, bad luck, or it's the outgrowth of bad lifestyle decisions or exposure to things that are bad. One way or the other, though, it is itself. It's the end point. It's the problem. It's the issue. It's the thing to confront. It's the thing that we're going to go to battle with. It's just a matter of how we're going to go to battle with it. What weapons are we going to use? We're going to use chemotherapy. We're going to use some kind of natural, hemp oil or something like that. What's the weaponry we're going to use to destroy this thing? And the really significant change and the other significant thing about that too is the fact that for many people, the experience of having cancer is really conflated with, it's synonymous with, it becomes very kind of mired in the experience of the treatment techniques that are common in our culture today and that individual has experienced or been exposed to, maybe seen other people be exposed to. So for example, it's
Cheryl.
It's a lot to process, this whole idea for you, just how can you say that cancer is not an awful, terrible thing? It's almost like, defending like, the indefensible. And I think that it's not to say that this is a different perspective on it is in no way to diminish the trauma or the negative experience that a person who has had cancer, particularly someone who's had cancer with the traditional paradigm or view of it, and from that point has then gone into traditional treatment. Not to say that it can't be really awful, a terrible experience, extremely painful, extremely scary, extremely all these different things. That, like the intensity of the negative experience that we can create from it really doesn't have anything to do with legitimizing kind of the paradigm, I guess, that we have. And so just to recognize that a different perspective is possible in light of and in context of the experience that you have had, whether it's personal or whether it's just knowing people who have gone through it or just maybe being afraid of it or whatever, the intensity of the negative experience really is not really relevant, I guess, to the consideration of a possible different perspective on it. And that for me is a very useful thing because it allows me to have seen the people in my family go through the experience of cancer, go through the experience of cancer treatment, and yet still consider the possibility that some of the basic underlying things that I've assumed about this process may in fact be wrong. And then there's another thing that you said, and when you were talking about the lung proliferation, it's difficult to get your mind around this stuff because if you don't realize the basically like the span of time that is sort of being manifested inside our physical body. So if you look at the different structures of the brain, if you look at the different structures of our body, we have things that have developed in the relatively recent history, and we've got things that are ancient, beyond all ancient, beyond our ability to conceive of spans of time. There are structures that are manifestations of things that developed during that period of time. And so if you start talking about, well, my lung cells are proliferating because I'm locked in a place where air, or I have a death rite or something something like that. Why would that be happening? Well, it's because it's as if you took all of the technology that we have now and placed it in the hands of someone that was roaming around 100,000 years ago. Imagine giving a person 100,000 years ago a telephone, a home security system, the weaponry that we have, all those different things. There would be a disconnect there. The way that they would use those things would seem kind of strange, right? There would be mismatches and stuff like that. We, in many ways, we've got this advanced, cutting-edge, leading-edge signal detection system, which is our kind of like our cortex, that part of the brain that we identify with as I, the part that thinks, the rational part, divides the world up, says that's good, that's bad, that's going to kill me, I better do something about that. That's really, really new, but it's working in concert with, it's working in conjunction with, it is actually in some ways providing information to structures, tissue systems, embryological systems that are so much older than even the human species. And so you've got ancient tissue responding to really cutting-edge, leading-edge signal response stuff. And so then you see some physical manifestations that might be hard to imagine. Why? How could this possibly be a good thing? How could this possibly be a useful thing? How could this possibly be a response to some kind of emotional trauma that I've had? You've got to understand the span of time that's contained within your tissues. You've got to understand the chronology of the development of your full organism, not just the you sense yourself to be, the housewife or the entrepreneur or the artist or the whatever, who suddenly has this illness. It's like that's what you're identifying with. But the reality is so much of you exists outside of your awareness. And I think learning to take that into account, it makes it possible, right, to begin to consider this profoundly new view of things and to make sense of things that your body is doing in a non-adversarial way, in a non-kind of estranged way, in a non-kind of like, you're letting me down here, I feel betrayed, I feel hurt, I feel whatever, and I feel this is a wrong thing that's happening. And it's wrong no way you go about it. There's no way of going about this, right, that could change the fact that there's a terrible mistake here. And anyone who suggests otherwise, that person has got to be a bad person, or they've got to be an idiot, or they've got to not know what they're talking about, because they don't know how awful this is for me. And a lot of that, I think, really, when you begin to understand, I guess, the nuance in all of this stuff, you really become free to consider the possibility of new and different things. And it's like that thing with the belief, that the beliefs are so powerful, because a belief is essentially moving forward, saying, I'll take in information, I'll consider possibilities, as long as they confirm what I've basically already come to the conclusion with. In kind of contrast to faith, which is, let me explore this and see what happens. I don't know where this is going. I don't know what this new idea is going to do. I don't know what it's going to say or what I'm going to learn about myself. Let me go in that direction and just kind of see what happens. And so it's kind of just to frame it.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in.
And getting back to kind of the nutritional aspect of things, and you gotta like think about all of the contradictions that we see, and somehow we kind of make sense out of it. I don't know, we say, okay, well, yeah, there's contradictions. Yeah, I know somebody who ate really healthy but they still got cancer. I know lots of people that eat terribly, they use really toxic stuff, but they seem totally fine. You've also got to square up the fact that like cancer has been seen since Egyptian times, you know what I mean? Like, since we have writing materials and, scrolling on cave walls and stuff, there are kind of depictions of this thing called cancer. And so if it's just lifestyle and modern food and modern toxins, that doesn't really square up. There's so many inconsistencies in the mainstream and even holistic paradigm. They things that they just can't really explain, and it just kind of gets like shoved under the rug, like spontaneous healing. I posted earlier today that medicine, like they have no answer for spontaneous healing. I actually was reading through some articles, and I'm going to do a really interesting video about some things that they've noticed with spontaneous healing, and it actually lines up perfectly with what we know from the 5 biological laws and what the body's doing. So that's a different topic. But when it comes to food, when it comes to what we are eating, we live an extremely healthy lifestyle and we love it. And now that I know that food doesn't induce cell changes that cause cancer, now that I know that, are we just going to go and eat crap? Absolutely not, because I think where nutrition plays that role in the body is really when it comes to healthy reproduction of your cells. So like how many years do people live? 120 years, and there's Hayflick's limit. It's basically how many times that your DNA is like a blueprint. You know, it's like a master copy, and then there's a certain number of photocopies available until the photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. You know, you see people that are 120 years old, like all their parts and pieces are the same as yours, but they're just not put together as well. You know, they're just
fuzzy.
the information is a little bit fuzzy. And what I think is that toxic food, toxic things that you are exposed to, smoking. I mean, even in this model, like smoking doesn't cause cancer. And I know that sounds crazy, and I know that like there's like a thing that is, as soon as you hear that, you go wrong. That's like, that sounds so incorrect, because we know that smoking causes cancer. We know, this is interesting too, we know that these foods and these things, and what about these studies that show that this causes cancer? Think about animal studies. Animals are extremely vulnerable. What's the most vulnerable animal? What is like scared of everything? A mouse. What do we do all of our food and like toxin studies on? We do it on mice, but we don't take into account the fact that these mice are scared, that they are having constant conflict shocks. In fact, more conflict shocks than we as humans even will have, because they're small. They're small, they're vulnerable, everything's bigger than them. These people are poking them, feeding, you know what I mean? Like they're isolated, they're taken away from their family, they separation conflicts, they've got death threat conflicts. Think about that. That's something, because perception, we're so drowned in it, we're so awash in it, we're a fish in water, we forget that it's such a huge component of what it is like to be you, and why people, you know, like it. And that's the thing, with cancer that's so hard to track. Oh, well, it's people of this ethnicity and this age and this gender and this, you know, person that ate these foods and that. So there's, why is there no way to track who's going to get cancer and who's not? And the people you expect to get it the least get it, and the ones you expect the most don't. Those things have got to be addressed. You can't just, you know, like put that information somewhere where you don't really analyze it and say, oh, well, you know, these things just happen. These things just happen isn't a good scientific reason for believing something.
I think it's it's kind of the byproduct, though, of the way in which sort of the scientific reductionistic model works now, which is that it's hopeless to try to take into account all of those variables, and therefore we basically just kind of write them off. And that's not a wrong thing to do. I think the issue with that, though, is that when we write off those the unseen patterns and the unseen relationships, the less obvious ones are always the most important ones. But we're least inclined to really spend a lot of time investigating them or considering them. You ever, like, in a conversation with someone, like if we're having a talk or we're talking with, you know, and it's like we're having a really pleasant time, and we know the topic could be sensitive, or we know it's opening up a whole can of worms, and we're like, I don't even want to go there. So much of, I think, the scientific research world is about not even wanting to go there, because I can't even, because as a scientist, as a researcher, it is excruciating to not be able to apply the scientific method to a specific consideration or to a specific thought. It's devastating. It's existentially threatening. It'll give probably a conflict shock, right?
Yeah.
And so when we talk about things like these muddled, energetic relationships, or if we start getting into, you know, what B.F. Skinner called the black box, which is like basically the experience of what's going on inside the mind that gives rise to observable physical behaviors, you can't know what's going on there, and therefore we ignore it, and therefore it's just too troublesome. And so we basically try to isolate that out, and then say, okay, well, if we hold that constant and steady and just assume everyone's being exposed to traumas, everyone's, you know, perceiving things in different ways, given that, let's isolate a variable, French fries or meat or something like that, and then let's see what happens. And that's it can be interesting in a kind of academic sense, and it can provide some relevant information. The thing is, we don't know what that relevant information is. We don't know how to relate to it. We don't know how important it is compared to other things. And that's the thing, is that so the thing that's kind of fundamentally immeasurable, at least in a kind of great, can't do an epidemiological study on the perceptions of trauma. It's just not possible. And for that reason, no one wants to talk about it. And yet it's hugely important. I mean, it's tremendously important. And I think when you recognize that, when you just sort of have that perspective, the mind begins to sort of open in a way that's very useful. And so, and that's like for us, for example. So, I mean, we don't eat a lot of things, right, that are considered carcinogenic. I mean, we don't, you know what I'm saying? And it's because
systematically gotten them out of our diet. Anything that even,
right.
Yeah.
And yet, so it wasn't like I said, oh boy, let me go like burn some meat to a crisp and smoke 3 packs of cigarettes today and all that different stuff. When I found out that, you know, those might not be the sort of like the triggers, you know what I mean? But yeah, it's just kind of a shift. It's just an interesting shift, and I think that it's one of those things too that you start to kind of consider that when you're looking in the microscope, there's tons of interesting stuff in the microscope. Look at this, it's a randomized, double-blind, controlled trial, and we found the and it's very interesting. But that microscope, right, is such a small subset of the full reality with which you are dealing that you can lift your head up from the microscope and look around, and there's tons of stuff that's hard to quantify and almost certainly really important and really relevant. And that's that thing, is if it's happening in one body, I mean, there's really nothing that goes on in the body. There's nothing about what it's like to be you that doesn't affect your health in some way, because it's part of one single system. I mean, ultimately, it's one kind of intertwined system, but when we're talking about an organism, everything is related, and it's so easy to look at and to measure how many calories and how many carbohydrates and how many of this, and did you eat at this place? Oh, well, a lot of people who eat at that place and therefore that's the problem. But really, we're not measuring sort of the immeasurable, and that's forgivable, I guess. But the thing is, we're not considering the immeasurable, and that is, I think, a part of the big issue here.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of it's an individual thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. John, I just saw your question, or James, I'm just kind of generally talking healthy, unhealthy, like typically what people consider healthy, unhealthy. I'm not getting into
what
like
the individual considers. Maybe.
Yeah, what the individual, because that really matters more than anything. And that actually brings me to a topic that I think is really important, because I taught it to so many people for so many years, that sugar, like Otto Warburg back in the 30s found that sugar feeds cancer. And so we take that like isolated, not, okay, sugar feeds cancer, therefore if I don't eat sugar I won't get cancer. That was what I thought, and that, eliminating all processed sugar, fruit sugar, like eliminating these sugars from your diet would help decrease the likelihood of you developing cancer at some point. And
then also, just to put in here, and to spend then your life in a state of constant agitation.
Exactly.
That so many people are eating so much sugar, and that your loved ones are eating sugar, and
it would upset me. It would upset me. Like and that again, that's an additional conflict shock. So you take a person that just newly gets, diagnosed with, say, cancer, and then they've got like, oh my goodness, all this information. You need to stop eating meat. You need to drink alkaline water. You need to cut all the sugar from your diet. You probably should only eat raw foods. You probably should just juice. Maybe you should just fast. I mean, it's overwhelming, and that stress. Like,
what's the essence there too? The essence of that is that there's a whole bunch of things about you that are not okay, that must be changed right away, that may have already killed you already. You may actually just not have died yet, and that you must, at a minimum, do a tremendous amount of stuff. It's going to be very uncomfortable for you. It's going to be very unfamiliar to you. Your life as you know it has to completely change, and then maybe you'll be okay.
Maybe you'll survive this.
And that's a tremendous. That is itself. And so there's an experience of that. And I think essentially, really, pretty much what the 5 biological laws are stating is that experience is significant.
Yes.
And that it's significant not just for quality of life, which exists in kind of like this encapsulated ego that kind of rides around in this body, and the only reason the body matters is that, the little ego driver inside of the psyche needs the body to do stuff. It means that the experience of the individual, the psyche of the individual, affects what's going on, and that if in that situation, if your relationship to food, say, or your relationship to yourself, you've got to do all these different things, you're eating that, and that's going to make you really, really, really unhealthy. There's an experience that comes from being told that. There's an experience that comes from believing that. There's an experience that comes from focusing on that, and that experience matters. And it doesn't just matter from a humanitarian perspective or from that poor person suffering. It matters literally directly. It relates to the physical manifestation of health, or the absence of health, or what we consider to be healthy, or what we consider to be desirable, that the person is really showing. And I think it's emphasizing that connectivity, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that, like, it's profoundly important. And the person who worries about, and I think that's one of the things about GNM that's so powerful, is that it gives you a way to relate to your health situation now that is a relief, that allows you to stop thinking the kind of thought that put you in the kind of neurological system that made the manifestation of what you're calling illness necessary in the first place. Mm-hmm. That's the interesting thing, is it kind of breaks that loop, and it is that kind of next level of information processing. I mean, it gives you choice in how you're going to relate to your reality.
Yeah, so no longer do I think that eating sugar is going to fuel your cancer. And that's what I thought, that like, every time you eat something sugary, those cancer cells are going nom nom nom, and they're getting bigger and bigger. Now I view it's the fear and panic makes cancer grow. fear and panic, and this is even going down to.
Would you say this necessitates the growth because of the biological?
Yeah, because of the biological program. And so you've got this, this conflict in your body is either, there's two different phases, and if you're kind of watching this for the first time, go watch my 101 video, because it'll give you the bigger, because there's 5 biological laws, and we're kind of zooming in on individual laws and discussing those, but having that bigger picture will help you to understand where I'm coming from with this. But and so the idea of metastasis, and that's really what is the major fear factor in all cancers, is that, well, here's this tumor here, but it might go to other places. And the theories about metastasis, the modern medical theories of it, are pretty loose. They aren't as airtight and scientifically documented as you would think they are, given how entrenched the idea is in all of society. But in GNM, from this perspective, the additional cancers do happen. Secondary cancers do happen, but it's not because cancer cells are just rogue and they're going off wherever. It's because of additional conflict shocks. Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest ones is this fear and panic conflict, and something having to do with abandonment, isolation, a refugee conflict, or an existence conflict. And all of those, this kind of existential fear, existential panic, or even being in the hospital, isolated away from your family, it causes water retention. It causes the kidneys, it's a kidney collecting tubule syndrome. And this, again, this one is a very, very old program. This one, it goes back to when creatures went from being water-dwelling creatures to land-dwelling. When you were a water-dwelling creature, what's the most existential scary thing is being washed up on shore with no water. And so you are literally a fish out of water. And so your body is programmed. If you have this existence, isolation, abandonment, refugee conflict, if you are scared and you're panicked and you're freaking out about something, this diagnosis, typically being in the hospital, that's just a scary environment. Your body immediately starts plugging up your kidneys so you retain water. And it's water retention that makes cancers seem like they are on fire and that they're growing. They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but it's because you are retaining water. And so that is one of the most amazing things that Dr. Hammer discovered, is this, and that's why my goal is for people to relax, to realize my body's doing the right thing. I have it, my body is responding to something that happened to me and that I've been, has been kind of an ongoing conflict that I've had for years and years. And that's why this isn't as intense as it is right now. That is why this is going on. I can relax. I haven't been killing myself with my diet. I mean, just the guilt of that, of a person getting diagnosed and then a bunch of people telling them, well, it's because you ate crap for so long. How much guilt is that? You feel bad, you self-devaluation, that affects the bones. And so these bone metastasis, that's because you're just so deeply devaluing yourself that your body, the program with the bones, that's a whole different thing to explain, but it affects the bones. And so there's all of these different complex, because you are a complex individual. You are not just food in a bag doing things. You are a complex, intricate, integrated mind-body. You are not a body with a mind, or a mind. Everything is all interconnected. And so it's the recognition of that, the awareness of that, the knowing that the food didn't cause the problem. There are other elements at play. And I think that people people who eat unhealthy, they tend to get more cancers. And I think it's because the people that have a really unhealthy diet, they, typically, and this doesn't account for not everybody, some people feel great about eating McDonald's. They don't care. They don't, it's not a sign of I don't value myself, so I'm going to go eat at McDonald's. But for some people it is. They don't value themselves.
People who think McDonald's is not healthy, and then they eat it anyway. They could eat other things. I think I keep coming back to that when you talk about the fish out of water thing, and I think it is, again, this understanding that we really are holding around, right, this ancient structure. And if you look at over the history of, and it's funny because you almost stop identifying yourself as a human being. I mean, you are a human being. You are an expression, an organism who is where they are right now doing what they're doing. But what does it mean to be a human being? It means to have been a lot of other really different, really weird stuff. I mean, it's really funny. And look at the major decisions over the history of our sort of lineage as an organism, going back to even pre-Homo sapien. You're looking at some major decisions that were made, and I'm not saying decisions in the way that I'm going to have the salad or I'm going to have the hamburger. I mean decisions like, are we going to be in the water, out of the water? You know what I'm saying? And it wasn't like the group of whatever's got together and said, okay, we're going to transition to the land now, guys. We got to vote. But there, in a sense, there is a kind of existential decision that's going on there, and that's that response. You know what I'm saying? That kidney collecting. So I mean, I'm in the hospital right now. My recent ancestors didn't come out of the sea. So if I'm in a dangerous situation or I'm being psychically disturbed, why does my body think that retaining this water is going to help? Well, it's because these tissues are really effing old. And the thing is, the you that you experience yourself to be, the conscious ego, the sensation of I, is the very tip top of an ancient kind of a very deep collection or tower progression of structures. And so you're getting, in a sense, it is that signal detection system, that everything about what we consider like the focal point of our lives really, in a sense, is this signal detection system designed to keep that really old stuff running, to keep it safe, to keep it going, to keep it persisting in existence. But we're a little full of ourselves. When I say ourselves, I'm talking about the we experience ourselves to be, not the we that we actually are. We're a little full of ourselves, and we think that our job and our house and our mate and the pretty things that we want, that's the only point. That's the real point. You know what I'm saying? All that ancient stuff was just existing to get us to where we are now. But it really is kind of the opposite. It's that everything about where we are now is designed for the preservation, for the ongoing existence of that stuff. And that stuff is super old, and you're running really old programs. You know what I'm saying? And then I think the thing too is that let's give ourselves an ability to relate to and experience these things in a way that takes that into account. And that way we don't have to freak out about the fact that our body is responding the way that it is, and that way our body doesn't have to respond to that freak out. Because that's the key thing to get, is that the body's responding to your experience in a very real way. Because your experience would not exist if it didn't do something for your body. So that's the thing. I wouldn't be having a feeling of love if that feeling of love didn't do something in the interests of my body. So procreation, say. I wouldn't be having an experience of excitement or of exhilaration or of motivation if that didn't somehow or another trickle down to benefit those ancient structures. I wouldn't be having a feeling of fear or apprehension. I wouldn't have the ability to worry about someone misunderstanding or misinterpreting or getting mad at me if that weren't somehow or another relevant to ancient structures. And if it's relevant to ancient structures, which it is, otherwise I wouldn't be having it, because those structures wouldn't have developed the sensory apparatus to give rise to it. If it's relevant to them, I can know for certain that those structures are responding to that experience that I'm having. And that's when it becomes really, really important to you to be deliberate in the, not the control, but the kind of guided, kind of like controlled accident, and the kind of relating to what's your experience of your experience. It's very important, because the structures will respond to that too. And I think it's the thing about food is that your relationship with the food begins long before you eat it. Your relationship with the food begins long before you select it. I mean, it has everything to do with how you feel about yourself, and it's got everything to do with what you think food is for and what it's about. Is it kind of a sinful thing? Is it kind of an indulgent thing? Is it something with whom you've got a dysfunctional relationship? Or is it healthy? Is it fulfilling? Is it good? I mean, when you think about food, do you think about what you want, or do you think about what you don't want predominantly? You might think about the foods that you want and the experiences that you don't, and that's just really important. And I think that there's just such an emphasis on action, because we got these physically focused bodies. I mean, we're all about the doing and the not doing. And I'm me, and I'm kind of like, I experience myself as kind of a non-physical ego, psyche, whatever. But I'm riding around in this physical, apparatus here, this meat suit, and I got to figure out what meat I'm going to eat or not going to eat, because the plants are better for me. So the plant flesh is better than the animal flesh. That's what someone told me, and so I'm going to eat that now and feel really bad if I eat the other thing. And recognizing that experience is just so profound, and that there's no way, what I say, like when I'm working with people, is that there's no sidebar in this creative process, so that you can't kind of put your thoughts inside a little bubble, put your experience, place your psyche inside a little jar. Hey, Sarah.
Hey, Sarah.
Thanks for being here. And you can't put yourself inside a little jar and say, oh shit, am I going to get that? I read that study and it said da-da-da-da-da. Your body's responding to that. And you don't have to freak out about that, and you don't have to stop reading studies, and you don't have to stop thinking stuff, but it would be a really good idea to realize that the meanings that you make in your mind at this intellectual, at this cerebral, at this scientific, at this hypothetical, at this conceptual level, those things are feeding down into the deepest tissues that you have. And just because we don't have a randomized double-blind control trial to demonstrate exactly how that happens doesn't mean that it doesn't make sense to think that that's probably true. I mean, you can deduce that at this signal detection system that we call our brains and our minds and our experience of ourselves. If I can sit down and read a paper and get nervous about the content of that paper, my capacity to get nervous about something suggests that my whole organism is responding to that capacity to get nervous. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. And I think when you start to understand that, you're like, man, have I been communicating some things to the rest of me that if I were conscious, if I knew how communication worked, would I have communicated that way? And that's not to say it's your fault. I mean, this is something that I do in like relationship coaching with people all the time, is that, oh, you know, a husband and a wife or a boyfriend and girlfriend are constantly fighting with each other. Well, did you know that when you were saying this to them, that you were saying that to them, but you're communicating all these things? They go, no, I had no idea I was communicating that. I'm like, well, they just told you that that's what they were hearing. And then as soon as you know that, when you're aware of that, then you change your communication in a way that is consistent with getting the responses that you want. And I just think that you deserve, right? People deserve, they're entitled to, and I think it's a reflection of reality, a way of thinking about what is. Regardless of whether what is lupus, if it's cancer, if it's, you know, a heart attack, or a family history of heart attacks, or some kind of skin condition, whatever it is, you deserve a way of relating to it that allows you to feel better about the fact that it's happening right now, and that allows you to, I think, stop the thought process that might be feeding into that thing, giving rise to that thing, not causing this bad thing to happen, but necessitating this kind of biological, phenomenological, physiological expression that's not consistent with maximizing the quality of what it's like to be you. And that's kind of the power that you have.
Yeah.
Is this framework and this apparatus and this freedom to think. And that's the thing, too, that it's not about necessarily, and that so many people I imagine are listening to this and they're thinking, okay, so what am I supposed to do? Because that's what everyone asks all the time is, okay, so because we're so focused on action and we're so focused on like, but and that itself is an expression of the fact, or a manifestation of the fact that we undervalue the significance of our experience. What you're supposed to do is just kind of let this stuff simmer. Think about it. Ask yourself questions. Think about your own personal experience. Think about your body. Think about your sense of self. Think about the you that exists beyond your normal everyday waking consciousness sense of self, and say, oh, you know, there's a big ecology going on here. This is interesting. Now, did they say that I should eat the salad or I shouldn't eat the salad? Oh, wait, no, what they said is that thought about should or shouldn't, that's significant and that's important too. And that what I think about the things that I do, those things really matter. And that whatever it is that I'm doing, the fact that I feel really good about the thing that I'm doing, that's important too. And that the experience is relevant on so many levels.
Yeah, it's like, it's put down the weapons. It's stop the freak out. It's realize the wellness that these symptoms represent. Truly, anytime you're experiencing pain, anytime you have inflammation, anytime that you're swollen. I just posted a video about skin rashes, and the skin rash signifies that the conflict has already been resolved. It does. The breakout, the zit, you may have seen that video that I posted, is a sign that the conflict has been resolved. Depending on the type of cancer, some cancers like ductal breast cancer is a sign that the conflict has been resolved. It's like a healing scab. And that's the thing, I asked a question like, would you want to cure your body's ability to make a scab? Well, no. Well, the scab's doing something very important for me, and it's like, it's that awareness. Like, we're okay with scabs because we can see it on the outside, and it makes sense to us. But cancer seems so much more mysterious, and we feel, you know, like we're on the lookout for it. We've got these weapons, and we've got this food, and we've got these drugs, and we've got all this stuff, and, you know, we're trying to prevent it, and we're looking out, we're scanning our bodies for x-raying our body, looking for this thing, and it's like, just, there is no adversary. There is no one to fight. Like, your body is you. Every symptom has a purpose. Your ankle, when you sprain it, it's swollen. It's swollen. It hurts. You can't walk on it for 6 weeks. You know, you can't do the things you want to do. But you know, it's like, oh, I had an injury, and now my body's repairing the tissue damage. I didn't realize the tissue damage was quite so bad, but, well, I guess it must have been because my body's doing this thing. You wouldn't want to get rid of that inflammation. You wouldn't want to get rid of that pain because it's a sign that your body is doing exactly what it needs to do. And when you, like, really just kind of...
And the second that because I sprained my ankle about 8 weeks ago, the moment that my ankle didn't hurt, I was out running. I was literally pounding the pavement with it, right? And so if it would have stopped hurting a moment earlier than it did, when tissue repair was still going on, then I would have been out there tearing my ankle up again, you know? And I think that's just such an important thing.
Yeah.
And I think that it just as a corrective, right? Just to kind of like give a different perspective on this stuff, because we hear so much of this kind of adversarial attitude to stuff that's going on inside of our body. And I think that so maybe there's a use to it. Maybe it is useful that the medical perspective does exist. And I personally am not suggesting that it's not, but I know that as individuals that it really is important that we have a correction on these huge paradigm swings that tend to filter everything that we see, and to have a different perspective to say, look, if it's going on in my body, there's a reconciliation kind of process that there's a perspective from which I'm like, what if I stop fighting this thing? What if I got curious about it? And when you can shift from anger or any negative emotion, betrayal or fear or anxiety, and shift to curiosity, which is in many ways what the 5 biological laws facilitate, right? You can't help but start asking these questions. You start kind of becoming one with your creative process again, and it's such a relief, because we don't have to find somebody to blame for this thing that's happening in the body, because this thing that's happening in the body maybe is not a bad thing. What if it isn't? That's the thing to think about. What if this is a manifestation of an adaptation to a healing process? What if that were true? What if this is just another example? And it's funny too, because I feel the pushback even in saying that, and that demonstrates the extent to which we've been indoctrinated to process and to filter these experiences of what we call illness through a certain lens. And that's enough for me to say, I'm going to look into this more, because I wouldn't have expected this resistance to this idea. And I have plenty of reference points for instances of healing, things that my body are doing that I consider to be good. They can sometimes be uncomfortable. They can sometimes be maybe even slightly painful, things that aren't particularly fun, and yet they are serving a function. And so, gosh, what if it's not an error? What if there's not a mistake going on? What if there's not even a consequence going on? What if actually everything's happening exactly like it's supposed to? How would I make sense of this situation if that were true? And going through that thought process is really useful. Doesn't mean you got to quit going to see your doctor necessarily. It doesn't mean you've got to radically do anything different. It's just the consideration of the possibilities of immense value. I mean, it has been for me.
Yeah. And
it just starts getting the brain going in a different way. It starts getting the mind going in a different way. It starts getting your experience to be different. And again, here we come back to that basic principle that how you experience these things matter. And the reality is that how you're experiencing your present reality is a part of that reality. And that if you shift your experience of things, you really can begin to shift what's going on. Well, we get this, right? It's not hard to put together that something happened when I was young, and so I thought certain things, and I felt certain ways, and I did certain things, and as a result of that, my life basically is an accumulation of all that stuff. I don't know why it's such a drastic thing to begin to apply that to things even going on sort of in our body, and it's just a different perspective, and it's very refreshing.
It is, and that's the thing. And when it comes to food, like, eat what feels good to you, eat what, and it is very important that your body is nourished. And like I said, with the where I think that toxic food, unhealthy food, has a big impact on the aging process and also the healing process, because you want good building blocks to make these new good tissues out of. I just really I would like to shift the consciousness from these are unhealthy foods, these cause cancer. The reason they're unhealthy is because they cause cancer. But the reason
which is bad, right?
Yeah, which is bad. And so I'm really working to vindicate cancer as this bad thing, as really this helpful thing, and you want to support your body while it heals, while it finishes healing. And it's actually really important, and especially to keep in mind, if you have particular types of cancer. So these are like the oldest cancers derived from the oldest germ layer, which is the endoderm. Again, to get familiar with that, watch the 101 video. These endodermal tissues are ancient tissues, and this includes the lungs, it includes the digestive tract, it also includes the breast tissue, and the body, when it's breaking down the tumor, so it builds up the tumor for a very specific reason, builds it up because you're having a death fright, an indigestible anger conflict, you're having a nest worry, and so the body says, ding, 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 we need to make more cells, make more cells, make more cells. As soon as you resolve the conflict, like the moment you resolve the conflict, the cell proliferation stops, because the body knows. It's like it's communicated. The brain, the nervous system is constantly communicating with these cells. It says, stop cell proliferation, and then it communicates to bacteria in your body. It communicates specifically to these tubercular, these ancient, they're like mycobacteria, like tubercular bacteria. It's an ancient bacteria that acts like a fungus, so it's called a mycobacteria. And so when we have these cancers that are tumors that need to be broken down during the healing phase, the body activates the brain communicates with these bacteria, and then the bacteria go to work. And the tubercular bacteria, similar to how you'll see fungus like on a tree, and it's breaking down the tree. It's like nature's recycling. Like the way that it breaks down old trees is with fungus. And fungus is kind of the cool, really cool and interesting the way fungus works. But fungus in our bodies work for a very specific reason, and it's breaking down, the tubercular bacteria breaks down the tumor that's been built up, and during that process there's a lot of protein loss, and you'll have like the smelly discharge because it's decomposition that's happening inside your body, but for a very specific purpose. So during the healing phase of endodermal based tissue cancers, you want to make sure that you're getting plenty of protein. And so that's really relevant for somebody who heard that, all raw diet or juicing is going to be the best, or like avoiding all meat because these foods are fueling your cancer, or these foods have hormones in it and the hormones fuel your cancer, all kinds of stuff like that. It's realizing like a good that's what I did before I discovered GNM, is like this nutrition coaching and showing you that, there's so many good foods to eat, and it's basically just eat real food, organic food, food close to the earth. And you need protein during the healing process of those certain types of cancers. And so that's very relevant when it comes to nutrition and cancer, and what are you going to do moving forward.
I'm kind of aware of, I was trying to get the words to describe the distinction in this approach to nutrition versus the normal one. And the thing is, it's whatever you're doing with your nutrition, whatever you're changing about your nutrition, the purpose is not to coerce the body into stopping what it's doing and to start doing something different. If you are in the kind of the conflict active, or if you're experiencing these conflict shocks, whatever you put into your body is going to facilitate the tissue's response to the psychic experience. Is this true? And so that's the sense in which what you're eating, it's not that it doesn't matter, but there's not a magic bullet, something that you eat that short circuits the body's tissue's ability to respond to the psyche's experience of existence. That's the thing. There's not, eating, grapefruit juice or green smoothies is not going to cut the connection between the body saying, holy shit, we got a big problem here, and the ancient endodermal tissue's response to that experience of a threat. The tissue is just going to take whatever you're putting into it and more or less turn itself in. It's going to use that to proliferate and to continue to respond. And so the key thing there, I think, really is, let me eat in a way that facilitates my body, that supports my body, not a way that fights illness, because I don't really think of illness in the same way. I think of a body, and there's an ecology, and it's like a big forest. If you think about a forest, we get it. That's an ecological system there. It's an ecosystem. And there's a lot of stuff going on in there, and some of it's obviously growth related. You got ferns, and you got trees, and you got all this different stuff going on. Some of it involves forest fires, naturally occurring fires that clean out underbrush, and there's these different responses that go on. Some of it's obviously good, some of it seems kind of violent, some of it seems kind of unpleasant, some of it you don't want to necessarily be in the forest when it's going on. But recognizing that the body's responding appropriately, to the experiences, the experiential signals that it's getting, and eating in a way that really just facilitates that. And recognizing that how you feel about the way you're eating is really, really important, because how you feel about the way you're eating is the experience, the psychic experience to which the body that is going to be made out of the stuff that you're eating is responding. And so it's actually kind of a really funny thing. If I am constantly feeling bad about the subject of food, constantly feeling soiled because I accidentally ate something that might not be AAA whatever rated, this, that, the other thing, that if I'm conscientious about what I'm putting into my body, it makes as much sense to be conscientious about the thoughts that I think and the experiences that I create about the things that I'm putting into my body. It's just taking nutrition and it's applying it to something more than food. It's recognizing that nutrition is a thought thing. It's extending it to the level of the less obviously physical. And I think that's the key, right?
Yeah, it really is.
Yes, it does matter that you eat, and that's the thing too. Eating well from something other than attention to lack, eating well for some reason other than not eating well is going to cause this bad thing called cancer to come and get you. You know what I'm saying? Eating well as a part of this thriving, flourishing human being, and recognizing that it's just ultimately another thing to feel good about. And the more you feel good, the more your body's really going to kind of respond to that. And that's how we approach it. Yeah. And the amazing thing about that too is that it gets so much easier to eat well when you stop telling telling yourself the story that I got to get my diet in order, I'm going to get cancer just like my mom. I got to get my diet in order, I'm going to die just like my uncle did. I'm going to get, and there are people for whom it is impossible for them to eat if they eat well, if they believe that eating well is that one thing, that tragic flaw, that thing that gets in the way. And if you've given, we have given, right, nutritional guidance to people for long enough to know that there are people who are incapable of doing the thing that you say, here's the one thing you need to do, and everything will be fine. You've just pointed them in exactly the direction not to go. They will go in every direction but that one, or they'll go 5 steps down that one and 20 steps down the other. And I think that when you just kind of get out of that whole system, which is to say, well, we got these problems, or we got these potential problems. What we really need are solutions to these problems, or solutions to the potential problems, right? If we can just find those, we'll be okay. And you go around, and you go around in this kind of, and you're like, wait a minute. I think that it's just me up here having fun, and I got this old body that hopefully is not going to give out too soon. But the reality is that everything that I think, everything that I experience, there is a biological, there's a tissue level response to that stuff. Shit, I guess I better stop worrying about what I'm eating so much. Because while I'm worrying about what I'm eating, I am manifesting. My thoughts are turning to things. I am creating in my body. My body is responding to, that's weird. I'm thinking about what I don't want. I'm getting what I don't want. I don't want something bad to happen because I'm eating, because of what I'm eating. Mm-hmm. And then I think and I think and I worry and I'm anxious and my body is saying, these old ancients, they're not using language, but they're basically saying, boy, that the signal detection system is going crazy. The fire alarm is on constantly. They're constantly worried. They're constantly fearful. They're constantly anxious and agitated. We better get going here because there must be something really bad coming. We better start building that lung tissue. We better start doing this digestive stuff. We better start eroding the coronary arteries so that we can get some blood through so that they can make a break for it when this thing comes to get them, because something's obviously coming and they see it. That you recognize that, man, okay, that's important too. And that just really shifts everything. So now when someone says, hey, guess what? 3 family members of yours got this, well, you better be worried because you're probably going to get it too. Or something really stupid, like what was it? 7 out of 10 women will get cancer.
I think it was 1 out of 8.
1 out of 8 or whatever. Yeah, okay, 1 out of 8?
1 out of 8.
Oh, that's less scary than most of the things that you... Was that a specific type, though?
I'm not sure. I think it was just a statistic, yeah.
Someone says X number out of X number of people is going to die of this. What a stupid thing to say.
3 out of 4, isn't they say heart disease or cancer?
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah. So there's these scary statistics.
Most people.
Pick your one. 3 out of 4 people are going to die because of this stuff. That's such a stupid thing to say. The most that you can say is retrospectively, when we looked at a group of people who lived before, 3 out of 4 of those people died. They don't fucking know that 3 out of 4 people are going to die because of something. And to tell people that, I know what the average person thinks when they hear that. They think that it's just fixed reality, that when God set the sphere in motion, or when the universe was, the Big Bang happened, that it was preordained that in 2017, 3 out of 4 people in America were going to die of heart disease or cancer. And it's but that's the implication. That's the logical implication people take. Well, science knows. There's billions of dollars. Well, science knows very specific things, and based on those things, they know what has happened in a certain group. They don't know everything about why, but they kind of know if we really dial it in, we can say some very specific things about some very specific people at a very specific moment in time. And then based on that, they do these prospective studies where they say, well, if things continue to go in this way, it'll look like this. But you and me and everyone else hears that, and they say, well, it's preordained. It's the way it is. Science is really powerful. We've got the National Institute of Health. Tell me 3 out of 4. So let me look at 4 people that I love and say 3 out of 4 of those are going to die of this. And everyone starts thinking that. And no one thinks that the fact that everyone's thinking that matters. And so everyone keeps thinking that. So everyone keeps manifesting it. Everyone keeps creating it in reality. And everyone says, well, is it the French fries, or is it the pork rinds, or is it the this, or is it that? Is it the arsenic, or is it the phthalates? Is it the lotion, or is it the, is it the fact that I live next to a power generator, or is it the, and meanwhile, everyone's in this constant state of anxiety. What's the thing that's common to everyone? They're freaking out all the time, pretty much. Yeah. And then it's kind of like, okay, the experience matters. Let me go and try to find some nice, healthy things to eat, and let me also create as good an experience as I possibly can of trying to eat progressively healthier things, because the experience really matters an awful lot too. And the tissues start responding to that, and they start responding in a way that I think is more consistent with. That's the thing. It's so funny. When you focus on improving what it's like to be you, right? If it's worth thinking about, it's worth thinking about in a way that feels good to you. And when you start focusing on thinking in a way that improves what it's like to be you, I've got a little bit of concern about certain health issues in my family history. How am I going to think about that in a way that feels good to me? What are the things I can say to myself? What's really funny is that your body begins, this is manifestation happening here, your body begins to respond in ways that are conducive to improving what it's like to be you. That's thoughts turning to things inside of one organismic ecology, one organism, and that's just kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, what you said there, Melissa, I think it's not so subtle mind control, it's overt mind control, because if we keep the people scared, if you can keep people scared, you have control over them. You've got them by the, you've got them.
But based on the idea that the thoughts don't matter, and that's the
Yeah.
thing too. And so there's how could people say things like that and it not be diabolical?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a possible way we can think of? And there is one, which is to say that, well, look, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen, and what you think about it doesn't matter. How you feel doesn't matter. People are always saying the world, entrepreneurs, the economy doesn't give an F about your feelings. That guy doesn't give an F about your feelings. So and so doesn't. It's a big kind of tough and robust kind of like way of approaching things. But it's like, well, your tissues give an F about your feelings, and your tissues are pretty important. And the more you kind of get into this kind of system of energy, you start to realize that actually, your feelings are pretty important, and
Yeah.
it actually does matter quite a bit.
And I think, like the byproduct of fear is people doing what you say. And so if we say this is a really bad flu season, or swine flu, or this flu, or that flu, and it's getting really bad, and
Right.
kids are dying, and people are dying, and you better go get your flu shot, and da-da-da-da-da. It's like, I wasn't going to go, but now I am because I'm really scared and I really don't want that to happen. And so, like, people, when they are controlled by what they see in the media, the drug industry, I mean, you watch these commercials and you're like, I have all those symptoms, I better get, you know what I mean? It's like
55 or older, like that's the symptom,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, and so all of that, it's controlling your mind, it's telling you your body breaks down, things screw up, germs and bugs and this and that, and so much to be afraid of and so much to be scared of, and it's all outside of you, and you can't protect yourself, and so you need this shot, and you need this stuff, and you need this food, and you need this vitamin, you need to do this, and you need to do that, and the whole time you're freaking out, and you're like, I don't even know if I can even possibly do enough to prevent cancer, because they say I've got to do all of this and all of that, but then there's diabetes, but then there's the, and it's like true constant turmoil. But like, truly, it's stop the fear, trust your body. Your body is what gives you the ability to have these thoughts. Like, it's on your side, it all is on your side. And so it's, and the biggest challenge, I think, coming up against this new thought, this new paradigm, this new movement that I really just want to get people talking about, is overcoming that just entrenched belief that there are bad genes, there are bad bugs, there are bad foods, there are bad things that we eat, and our bodies do bad things in response to it, and we need to, outwit that and make sure we, trick the body first, and so here, have this shot so that you can do this and I can control you and get this certain response that I want.
It's an action focus, though, and that's the
Yeah,
thing.
it is,
It's coming from people who believe that the thing standing between utopia and disaster are certain physical actions. And so if I can say something to you that will maximally, I'm a scientist and I've studied this, and so I can study psychological literature, and it says that if you freak people out and scare them enough, well, they'll do things that are important. And if I think that
well, it's all fear. I mean, they even teach that in kind of like marketing online. It's like, it's fear-based.
But if
it's
I
like
think,
pain
though,
point.
that the key thing is not that you think a certain way or feel a certain thing, right, that's right for you. The key thing is that you do a certain observable behavior. You get your recommended daily intake, or you go and receive this procedure or this prophylactic shot or whatever. That's the main thing. Then any ends will justify the means. Because look, I did a study over here. There was a study in 1950, and it showed that when people did X, this didn't happen, or it did happen, or whatever. At that point, I've got license, in perpetuity, to scare the pants off of people, and the thing is, those are people that think it doesn't matter that you're afraid, as long as you do certain things, because you're just this meat sack, right, that kind of sometimes needs a little bit of medical help to function properly. And so if we scare the hell out of you, but you take this vitamin and you get this shot and that you do these things, go through these procedures that just happen to cost a lot of money, that then everything will be okay. And then whatever it takes to get you there is all that matters. And if I can guilt you, that's fine, that's your thing. Some people respond to guilt, some people respond to fear, some people don't want to be ostracized socially. Well, just get them all going at once and throw them all at people at one time, and let's do a picture of like a grandmother who can't touch her baby because she hasn't had this shot, and so then, and it's all these. Let me just appeal to all the different emotions, because it's really physical actions that count. It's the doing that matters. It's the physical stuff. It's the did you have this? Did you not have this? Did you do that? Did you not do that? Those are the things that really matter. And you see that too. That is the progression of society into this kind of bizarre lockstep, militaristic almost, or sort of totalitarian anyway, nanny state, right? Which is that, listen, we'll get to your experience later, right? Why is our health so important? Because of our experience, right? Because it facilitates well-being. It facilitates this ability to flourish as a human being, as a point of consciousness. And if what we start doing is eroding the quality of what it's like to be us in order to preserve the longevity of these bodies that really exist, that are important to us because of their ability to facilitate what it's like to be us, experiences of well-being, we've got the whole thing backwards. And we start doing really weird stuff, which I think we are kind of doing.
Yeah.
You know, and so kind of shifting that around one person at a time, I think, is a very useful thing.
And just paying attention to your experience and like just watching things, like start observing more. And that curiosity is key. I saw somebody, I think Amanda asked about like, what about a person who's just like in worry mode constantly and they're anxious, you know, and they, you know, it's getting like becoming curious, watching your thoughts. Why am I thinking this? What thought is this? What, you know, what am I worried about happening? You know, is that an actual real threat? You know, is that something, you know, so watching your thoughts, becoming curious, big thing, just like watching like in marketing, because all marketing it's pain point. It's like, how can we make them feel worried? How can we make them feel left out? How can we make them feel scared? How can we make them basically comply and buy whatever product that we are offering?
By the way, if you're not in the Ever Better Life course, you are missing out, because there's only 2 spots left for all eternity.
Yeah, and so like all of these things are these you know, they're based on these basic conflicts, like these concerns that we have of wanting to fit in and wanting to do the right thing and wanting to be healthy. And so, I mean, it just can take you in so many different directions if your paradigm allows for it. So if your paradigm allows for you to think that like bad foods cause cancer, and then that's what you're going to see and that's what you're going to experience. And so you're more likely to buy those products or do, you know, this or that thing. But when you realize that like like all is well, your body's actually doing the right thing, we've just been misinterpreting it, you know. And so that to me, it's like, it's ultimate freedom, it's ultimate good feeling. And it's not just, and that's the thing is, and this isn't just some airy-fairy idea of like, just ignore your cancer and don't do anything and it'll all just go away on its own. It's not that. Like, there is a proactive element of like your consciousness, you know, and that's like what we do is help people like work on how are you seeing the world? How are you generating this experience right now?
Can I say the curiosity? If you can't, who asked that question?
Amanda. Yeah.
It works really well if whatever you're worried about, see if you can get curious about that situation. If you can't do that, though, what you can do is keep worrying about the thing, because you can't not worry about it. The more you try not to worry about it, the more you worry about it, right? Go ahead and let yourself keep worrying about the situation, but get curious about your worry. So we got your situation, and then we got you. And we got worry going on between those two things. If we try to change that, you're so practiced at it, it'll probably just continue. But go ahead and keep worrying. It's fine. You don't need to worry about worrying. That's just more worry.
It's meta worry.
That's just it's meta worry. It's even worse, right? But if you are worrying about stuff, well, then go ahead and keep worrying about stuff. But get curious about how it is you manage to worry about stuff. At some point along the way, insert a little curiosity into the process and just start watching and go, that's interesting. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that kind of funny? When I think about this, I feel this way. Oh, okay. That's you know. Actually, let me look at it a little bit more closely. Why would I say this to myself? And what's bothering me about this? Well, I imagine this thing, and I say, if that happens, that means this thing, and I don't want this thing to be true. This meaning I don't like, and I assume that's what it's going to mean. And that's when I create the sensation of worry. And then if you say, I'm stupid to do this, it's wrong to do this, I got to stop to do this, I'm going to get sick or whatever, that won't work right well. You can just watch that too and say, that's interesting. When I badger myself about worrying, I tend to worry about the negative consequences of worrying. Oh, so that's how I create that experience of worrying. And the more you watch that stuff, it'll just kind of start to fall away. And all you got to do is watch. All you got to do is just kind of step back and observe the whole thing and recognize that it's not really serving you. Let yourself do it. Just let yourself do it and add in an element of observation and kind of learn something about yourself.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I do want to avoid, because again, the person's like, okay, so what do I need to watch out for? How do I not get cancer with this new model? Oh, no, so I have to avoid conflicts. Oh no, how am I? And then you get worried about avoiding conflicts, you know, because the conflict shock, this thing that catches you off guard, that's the initiator of the adaptive physiology, the, you know, additional cells or the erosion of cells. But just to know, like, I feel okay with the fact that some things might catch me off guard, and I might be, you know, I might get scared about something, or I might, you know, get some, and I'm not worried about that because I know how I'm going to respond. And that's that elevated awareness to know, okay, I think the situation may have just kind of caused me to have a little bit of a conflict. And, you know, but I'm going to think about it in a way that makes me feel good. And so it's not going to be a long drawn out thing, because the intensity of like that your body will say build a tumor or erode tissue, it happens in proportion to how severe the conflict is for you. So if it's like 10 out of 10 super intense, like the tumor will grow fast or the erosion will happen fast. And if it goes on for a really, really long time, the tissues start to get depleted. And so there, you know, it's the length of time and the intensity. And so knowing that conflicts will happen, but your ability to downgrade them and to kind of chill about it and say, you know, I know that affected me, you know, I bet I'm going to have some kind of symptom response, but it actually becomes so interesting. And again, a curiosity thing, like, oh, you know, that this thing happened, and you know, I know I felt a little bad after it happened. I got a little nervous. My heart rate, you know, went up a little bit. I kind of noticed some physiology changes. I wonder how my body actually interpreted that, because it could be something that you're not really aware of how your body may have interpreted it. But then you get a zit on your face, and you're like, oh, I must have had an attack conflict or a feeling soiled conflict. Oh, isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. Or you know, I must have interpreted that as a separation conflict, and then I got a rash. I've got a breakout on my arm now. Like, isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. And so that ability to just be curious about it, to watch your symptoms, to make those connections, and then if you need help, like that's what my coaching is for, is to kind of just help you. You know, like you don't need the help, but if you want it, if you want someone to kind of guide you through it, so you know, especially if you've got conflicts from like a long time ago and you don't know what caused it and you still feel anxious about it, you know, there are ways of uncovering, you know, old conflicts. There are ways of downgrading and even eliminating the emotional charge on old conflicts. And so, you know, that's all stuff that can be worked on, but just really that ability for yourself, it's all about peace of mind. It's all about ease. It's all about, I feel okay with who I am and what I'm doing, and like my body's doing the right thing and I'm eating the right thing and everything is well, and I can rest and I can relax and everything's okay and everything's good and I'm good and people are good and all things are good. You know, it's like that. Truly, it's all about ease. It's all about well-being. It's all about peace of mind, and it's all about it's starting with this mental process, because that's where it's all going on, like in your mind.
Yeah, you may not need the coaching, but you probably, or you may need the coaching to help you realize you don't need the coaching. And that's kind of like
that's what we always say to people. It's like you can do it, but sometimes to realize that you could do it on your own, you need a little, you know, some assistance. I think
the thing is just, you know what's right for you. You know what's right. And I've never had anybody go through my course and do work with me and be anything other than like thrilled with it. It hasn't happened. And so I think we don't really play it up enough. We don't really talk about it enough because people really do love it. But I think it's one of those things where you kind of know it's right for you. And if you do it, don't do it from attention to lack. Don't do it from a place that says, I have got to, or bad things will happen. Because that gets us maybe a certain number of people, but it doesn't set things off in the right foot. It always works best when people are like, you know, I see this, it just feels right for me. I feel good about doing this. I feel like I want to interact with these people at a deeper level. I feel like it's the thing for me to do. It's an indulgence, it's an enrichment, this is it, I'm into this, I want to go for it. And we don't really want to spend much time kind of like forcing you in that direction, because we want to have relationships with real people. And that's kind of a weird, quirky idea that we have, is that we can be real people and interact with weird people and be tremendously successful in the things that we're doing in that way. And it works beautifully, because it's not a therapist and a patient, and it's not a coach and a client. It's like this co-creative, two people come together and improve what it's like to be you. And it doesn't really matter if it's in the context of health, or I typically just do more. I mean, there's really no blending, though, is there? Or there's a ton of blending, because the people who I work with have these crazy health conditions that just kind of improve and go away, you know, because they just start aligning themselves with well-being, and then it happens. And so
so some people come for like the mental wellness component, like, oh, I have stressful relationships, oh, I'm chronically anxious, oh, I've got, you know, this or that, like personality problem, like, oh, help me. And then people come like to me with like a physical thing, but it's like, it's not a physical thing, it's a mental thing. I saw a couple of questions. I'm going to answer this, Samantha, about babies, toddlers that have heart problems and cancer. Like as soon as you're conscious, as soon as you like have a body, you can experience conflicts. And in the womb, babies can experience conflicts based on what they hear going on, something that they hear that they don't want to hear, like babies being born deaf. They can have existence conflicts. They can have separation conflicts. One really common conflict is like an ultrasound. Like, think of what is an ultrasound. It's like, have you ever been in the water, or like a movie where there's something in the water and then there's like, wah, wah, there's like sonar,
right?
like sonar sounds in the water is really loud, and an ultrasound to a tiny baby, like the baby, like it's in this cocoon, womb, safe haven where it's constantly in contact with like being in there, and it's constantly hearing the mother's voice and hearing the mother's heartbeat. But then the sound comes along and it's wah, 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 you know, and everyone's all happy and they're looking at the baby, but the baby's having a different experience.
And one thing I would say about that too, just to emphasize,
and not
is
all
that,
babies.
Well, yeah, that's the thing too, is that it's not something to feel bad about, or to
No.
say, oh God, I did this and I shouldn't have, because really there's this thing that ultimately, and that's the cool thing about this, is that everybody's 100% responsible for their experience of what it's like to be them, and a mother cannot control what the perception of her child will be. I mean, a mother can control the way she interacts with her child, but not how her child will perceive that. My mom controlled how she interacted with me to some degree. I mean, not all consciously, but to the degree that, you know, she made choices about how to interact with me, but she didn't make choices about how I was going to perceive and experience those things. And so it's not like it's the parent's fault or it's the parent's responsibility. It has everything to do, and that's the thing. Are ultrasounds good or bad? Well, gosh, I mean, it kind of depends on the experience of the infant. So let's, you know, you got to be able to communicate.
Excuse me, infant.
Well, that's the thing, is that there's no, and so there are these. It is all about perception. It's all about the experience of what it's
Of
like
an individual.
to be you.
It's so cool.
And
it's the only thing that takes that into account.
And there are things that can be done about that, right? And so it's not like we need to live in fear or try to be in a plastic bubble, because guess what that is? It's more of the same thing. You are in it, right? Consciousness is a match that's been lit. And so what we're doing right now is finding new and better ways to constantly respond to what is, and say, given this, what is wanted? Given this, what do I want? You know, okay, so these things happen, and here's this response. And everyone ultimately is responsible for their own life experience. As soon as that experience is happening, the individual is responsible for it. I mean, legally, we have these different age at 18 or 25 or 21 or whatever these, but really, I mean, ultimately, in kind of a cosmic sense, in a biological sense, we're all kind of just responsible for making our own way in this life. And what we're really interested in doing is helping people for whom, you know, it feels right, it seems right, it just is the right time to help you improve what the quality of that experience is. And that's just kind of a cool way to think about it. It's, like, it's fun. It's just it's light. It's airy. It's progress forward. It's the way to relate to this life experience, and it's very good.
Yes, Cheryl. Sometimes children, as they get older, they can have conditioned responses. Mm-hmm. Like, you can condition your child to be really scared of everything.
And that's a behavioral thing too, by the way. That the response that you're probably referring to is largely about, well, you know, the child threw a tantrum because they saw X. So you're looking at behavior. The perception, though, initially, always kind of belongs to the child. I mean, how the child perceives, like, let's say, some kind of an abuse. There are a bunch of different ways that children can perceive verbal, physical, emotional abuse. And now that's not to say that abuse is not inherently not a good thing, because it's not difficult to surmise or to conclude that regardless of how the child's going to experience it, if we could pick abuse or not, we would probably go with no abuse. But it also in kind of like in concert with that, the perception that the child creates is hugely important, because there are certain children that conclude that they're worthless, right? And that they're not worthy of anything. And so they go off and they find people who then abuse them. There are other children who will conclude based on perception that the world's a dangerous place and that you better beat people up or they're going to beat you up first, and that you can't trust people. There are other children who conclude, who reach kind of what you call maybe a healthier conclusion or perception that, you know, sometimes people do things that aren't really that great. Sometimes everyone's always doing the best they can. Sometimes the best they can do is not very good, and then other people can be harmed by that. And so, but you do definitely fall into these patterns of perception, absolutely. And I think that it's one of those things where, in terms of your interaction with other people or your interaction with a child, what you would want to do is to give as much attention to what you want as you possibly can, and model that for them. Because I don't know that a lot of this stuff you can, I mean, when I'm working with people, I have the somewhat thrillingly difficult task of directly kind of transferring this information. But when it comes to people with whom we're in close relationships, our parents, our children, our siblings, or, you know, it's really the indirect, the implicit, the modeling that we do that matters most. It's interacting, it's providing that child with an example of someone who perceives things in a way that's resourceful, so much more powerful than sitting little Timmy down and say, listen, Timmy, your perception of this thing is going to matter a whole day, it's going to go right past, you know. But if they get to see you to the extent that, their point of attraction, their perception, their history, or whatever will allow them to see you doing. You should basically. That's kind of like why selfishness is such a good thing, because if you'll just go live the kind of life that you would like other people to have, they'll see you living that life, and you'll be a wonderful reference point for them. But if you worry about the fact that other people aren't living the kind of life that you'd like for them to be living, they'll see you doing that, and then they'll look around and start worrying about the fact that other people aren't living the kind of life that they'd like to be living, right? And so, or that they'd like for them to be living. And so,
it's all about that modeling, and just think about, just that there's an experience going on. Like it's not isolated. Like you don't become, what's the difference, a week before the baby's born and a week after, it's like, it's still perceiving, it's still experiencing, like it's feeling the mother's emotions. If it's an unwanted pregnancy, if we find out the sex isn't what we want it to be, like that child, it is having a perception. And it's not, again, to freak out and to say you did something wrong, but like everything that the mother's going through, all these fears that she's having, these communications, like verbal and nonverbal, like it's going on physically inside of this body, and there is a being that's perceiving everything that goes on. And then early childhood experiences, like a hospital birth, can be extremely traumatic for the mom, for the baby. Lots of separation, lots of poking, prodding, lots of strapping down and doing, crazy things. It's like there's so many things that happen. And so it's this paradigm really, like it helps us to be such like more loving people, and more just kind of like oh my goodness, this person has an experience. Like I realize they're tiny, I realize they're small, but they're having an experience, they're having a perception, they're seeing the world in a particular way, and I don't know what that way is. And so if there is a chance that this child could be traumatized by this thing, I might consider not doing it. Like if I feel, and this is one thing, and this is kind of a topic of its own and very heated and very, easily debatable, with like circumcision, but like that child has an experience. And a lot of people say, oh, well, they don't feel the pain, or they don't feel this, or they're total, my kid had it done and he was totally fine and it didn't affect him. And it's just like, you don't know. Like if you can't communicate with that child because they're so small, they didn't consent, they don't know, it can be extremely traumatizing. You have no
people who actually say that they can't feel it.
No, and I think they've recently done more studies about like a baby's pain perception. But
that's
there was
one thing I would say about
pain, that they're not experiencing pain.
The perils of science is that you've got an organism with a fully, and I'm not even talking about what you should or should not do. I don't like talking about what people should do, because it's not my wheelhouse. But like you've got a child, you've got an organism with a fully formed nervous system. They've got a brain, they've got a spinal cord, they've got nerve endings in their body, and you're chopping off one of the most nerve-rich areas, or areas of dermal tissue, right, of skin in the body, and the medical system or some system of professionals will say to people, oh yeah, don't worry, they can't feel it. And this is in spite of the fact, too, that the child often screams, right? Almost always. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
I mean, you have this reaction. So that's how very intelligent people can come to some conclusions that just don't. And again, this is not about whether or not you should or should not circumcise your child. Not my business, right? But I'm just saying that I would want to know if the medical establishment that I was allowing to make decisions for me was coming to conclusions like the conclusion that a child that's been born, that's got a brain, that's got skin, that's got a nervous system, that screams when you do something to it, doesn't feel what you're doing to it. Oh, don't worry about it. They don't really feel it, or they won't remember it, or anything like that. And it's kind of like, well, that kind of seems like bullshit to me. It just seems like that just seems kind of baffling. And I'm wondering, if you're going to tell me that, I wonder what other kind of bullshit you're telling me, whether you know it or not. I mean, like that's just how my mind works.
Yeah.
I'm kind of surprised to have heard. I've never.
That's the thing. They don't remember it. Oh, it's not that bad. It's like I don't like pulling off a scab. They really diminish the intensity because they don't do.
That doesn't sound like a good idea.
The child's very young. They don't do anesthesia, so I don't know. Basically, there are traumas that can happen before a baby is born. There are traumas that happen very early on, and so, like a lot of things, like with kids, like these childhood leukemias and things like that. That's like a self-devaluation. Like, how does this baby perceive itself coming into this environment? You know what I mean? Like, how do the people? What are the vibes? Like, what is the vibration of like the way the people feel about this child, and how is the child perceiving it? It's all, and that's that mystery component is like, oh wow, what, I mean, I didn't think that the baby, that's like that separation thing I posted just before we got on here about rashes. It's like the mom, all she's doing is she's taking a shower and she pumps some milk and she's like, oh, the dad and the baby, they can have a moment, and so I pump this milk, put it in the bottle so dad can feed the baby and they can connect. Baby's like, where's my mom? Separation. Like, I've never been eating and not had my face up against her skin, you know, and the baby in that moment can perceive a separation conflict. And what happens is it's programmed into the tissue to erode, to like kind of become numb against this thing that, you know, I perceive this separation, and I want to like decrease my emotional and like my the intensity of it. And so there's erosion of the skin, but then mom gets baby back, baby's totally okay, and then a rash breaks out on the face, and mom's like, oh my gosh, what did I do? What did I eat? What do I need to cut out? Then she's freaking out, and then she's nervous, and baby feels that. And so it's like,
and so the message there probably, right, is not to freak out if you need to take a shower. Like
no.
It's just to realize basically that we're sensitive in our responses.
Yeah.
And then over time, I mean, to teach yourself, first of all, and then over time to teach your children or the people that you come into contact with a way of responding to this stuff that really, you know, that kind of takes into account kind of the nature, and it makes sense of these things. One thing I would say about that conflict thing, because I'm aware of the fact that like a lot of people don't have memories from very early childhood. If you don't have pre-linguistic memories, if you don't have memories of what it's like to be you before language, I mean, I do. I remember, and I for a long time I didn't realize that everyone was not this way. But if your first memories like from kindergarten or from first grade, you don't have a memory of not being hypnotized by a culture of language and by language as a representational system. And so a lot of this stuff sounds a lot weirder to you probably than it actually needs to. If you've got memories of what it was like to exist before words were the dominant thing. I mean, we were about being distracted by social media. We are hypnotized by language 100%, and we can't feel things that we don't have words for. When words were sort of developed to just, you know, communicate feeling. It's an interesting thing. But if you don't have those memories, that kind of like oceanic connectedness and that kind of sensation of knowing what's going on with the people around you before you were caught up in the interpretation of the words they were using, kind of a feeling, what do you want to call it, the vibes or the energy, or whether it's just picking up on the nonverbal cues or whatever. If you don't remember that stuff, then I would just kind of submit to you, consider what life is like for an infant that is perceiving, but that doesn't have the means of communicating with words, for one thing, but then on the other hand, it is not constricted or confined by language, and therefore just experiences purely and directly. And then you get these very literal responses. I mean, I remember what it was like to see these like flittering kind of pictures of my grandmother and my mom and stuff going on. I remember what it felt like to be talked about. I didn't know what was being said, but I knew I was the object of attention. That felt a certain way. There was a response to that. This stuff matters. I mean, and it's not like we got to do it just a certain way. All you got to do is just do what you're doing with an awareness of the fact that all this stuff does matter, and then you will do the right things, and everything will be cool, you know. And it's just kind of like having that freedom of perception. I think is really kind of important, and remembering that, like, you know, there's much to be explored and to be learned about, and because the baby is kind of inert in a sense. It's there and it screams, but it's not walking around and it's not communicating complex experiences. Doesn't mean it's not having complex experiences. It's having experiences that are in many ways richer than ours, because we're so distracted with our thoughts inside of our head and our language and the words that we're using. We're oftentimes kind of dissociated from our body. So there's a sense in which I think probably the infant is more sensitive, more primed to experience than anybody else. And we're so stupid because we're so hypnotized with our words that we're saying, oh, don't worry.
Oh, but I'm just saying
he
this.
Can't feel anything. He can't feel anything. Don't worry about it. You know,
yeah.
I'm a doctor. I went to, you know, and so, yeah, I don't know. That just kind of came up to me.
Yeah.
It's an interesting perspective.
Yes, Sammy, I agree. This is I actually think that this is the most interesting conversation that's going on all of Facebook and all of the internet right now. Like, I feel like this is the most interesting.
I'm waiting for my award.
I mean, it is. And please, if you appreciated this content, please share this, because if one more person, and that's my goal, is like literally if one person today can be less scared of cancer, can be less scared about what's going on in their body, less fearful, and more conscious of how they are communicating with themselves, how they're communicating with their children, how much their feelings matter, how much their point of view and their perception and who they are and how they feel, how much that matters. I mean, if one person, just think about what that does to like the collective, you know, for people just like caring about how other people are, you know. It's just like, oh yeah, I understand you're having an experience, and I understand that experience is different than mine, and just like that ability to see things and to know that, I mean, how you see the world matters so much. So please, if this was helpful for you, please share it, get it out to as many people as possible. That's actually why I wasn't sure how I initially wanted to share share a lot of this information. So I made a Patreon page because this is like what I want to do is make, you know, informational videos so people can learn about GNM and learn about these perspectives. You know, and so I think I'm going to change it so that it's not like a paid thing, like certain people can view this if I'm going to make all of the content available for everybody, and then if you want to donate or if you want to work with us directly, and then just charge for that. But because this stuff is so profound, it's so life-changing, it's so like can change everything for a person, for a family, for a child, to see things with this new perspective, that's kind of the direction that this is going. So we appreciate you guys so much for sticking around. This is like a really long video, like I think an hour and a half, but I mean, again, the most interesting, richest, most wonderful, fabulous conversation happening on the internet right now, and you were a part of it. So thank you again.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll be back soon with some good stuff. And if you need to catch up, watch a GNM 101. I've got a breast cancer tutorial. I just posted a video about separation conflicts in babies and rashes and stuff. So whatever, you know, resonates with you to share with your community would be awesome. So have a great day.
We
See
love
you
you.
later.
Have fun.
Love you guys.